Wyoming Territory, June 1873. The wind carried grit and silence across the empty ridge, and Garrett Ellsworth reined in his horse at the edge of a shallow valley, his eyes narrowing on what should not have been there, a woman in a torn blue dress, stumbling through the tall grass with one boot and no hat, dragging a broken satchel behind her. He kicked his boots against the gelding's flanks and rode hard. She spun at the sound, face pale, eyes wide. Her hands clenched the strap of the satchel like it could protect her. "Easy," Garrett called as he dismounted, holding one hand palm out. "I am not here to hurt you." Her breath came fast, shallow, but she did not run. "They left me." He stepped closer, taking in the dried blood on her sleeve and the dust clinging to her hem. She looked like she had not eaten in days. "Who?" "The wagon train. I fell behind. My horse panicked during a river crossing. When I got to camp, they were gone." Garrett looked down the slope at the trampled grass and wagon tracks already fading in the wind. "When was this?" "3 days ago," she whispered. "They knew I was missing. They left anyway." He could hear the tremble in her voice, saw the way her shoulders hunched like she expected him to turn and ride off too. "You hurt anywhere?" "I twisted my ankle. It's not broken." She looked up at him then, and he saw the grit in her jaw, the steadiness in her eyes. "I can walk." "Name's Garrett Ellsworth," he said gently. "I will not leave you here." She hesitated. "Edda Kline." He nodded once. "Come on, Edda. Let's get you on the horse." She limped toward him, biting her lip as she walked. When he reached for her, she flinched. "I will not hurt you," he said again, softer now. She let him lift her, gripping his shoulder as he settled her in the saddle. Her fingers lingered longer than they had to. Garrett led the horse on foot, heading west toward the line of cottonwoods where he had made camp the night before. The sun dropped low as they walked, and by the time they reached the trees, shadows were long and the sky had turned the color of rust. He built a fire and handed her a tin cup of water. She drank slow, like she was used to rationing. "Where were you headed?" he asked, watching her from across the flames. "Oregon. To marry a man I have never met." He nodded. "That's still your plan?" She stared at the fire. "I do not know anymore." They ate beans and hard bread in silence. When the fire burned low, he set out a second bedroll but gave her his blanket. "You do not have to, I know," he said. "But you are cold." She curled beneath the blanket and finally let her eyes close. Garrett sat with his back to the fire, rifle across his lap, gaze on the dark hills. He was used to quiet, used to being alone. But tonight, with her breathing soft behind him and the stars spread wide overhead, something shifted in his chest like a locked door easing open. The next morning, she limped to the creek and washed her face while he saddled the horse. She winced as she climbed up but said nothing. They rode slow. Her ankle made walking painful, so Garrett scouted from horseback, letting her rest. By evening, they reached a small trading post, nothing more than 2 timber buildings and a corral. "I can try to find someone heading west," she said as they dismounted. "Pay them to take me the rest of the way." "You have money?" "No," she said, too honest to lie. He looked down at the dust on her dress, the fading bruise along her cheekbone. "You are not going with strangers." She frowned. "You are a stranger." "Not anymore." Her eyes held his for a long moment. Then she nodded. They stayed the night in the loft above the post stable. Garrett slept by the ladder, rifle nearby. She curled in the hay with a blanket he had bought for her. In the dark, her voice reached him. "Thank you." He turned his head. "You are welcome. You do not even know me." "I know enough." She was quiet a long time. He thought she had fallen asleep until he heard her whisper, "I do not want to marry a man I have never met." He sat up on one elbow, watching her silhouette against the moonlight. "Then do not. I have nothing else. No family. No money. I do not even know where I am going." "You could come with me," he said before he could stop himself. She looked over. "Where?" "Montana. I have land. A small cabin. Horses. It is quiet." She hesitated. Why would you offer that? He swallowed. Because I want to. Edda sat up, pulling the blanket tighter. You do not owe me anything. I know, but I want to help. And I would not mind the company. She did not answer, but she did not turn away either. They left the next morning. The trail was long and dry, but Garrett knew the land. He taught her how to ride proper, how to shoot his spare rifle. She learned fast. Every night, they camped by rivers or in the shade of cottonwoods. Every night, the silence between them grew softer. One day, as they crossed a narrow pass near the Bighorn Mountains, Edda said, "You never asked why I was left behind." Garrett looked over. "I figured you would tell me if you wanted to." She nodded slowly. "They did not like that I questioned things. That I asked too many questions. The man I was supposed to marry sent word ahead. He wanted someone quiet. Obedient." "You are neither," Garrett said. "No," she said. Then she smiled, small and real. "You do not seem to mind." "I do not." They reached the edge of his land in late July. The cabin sat in a grove of pines, with a creek running along the back. It was not much, but it was his. She dismounted, looking around in silence. "It is beautiful. It is home." Edda turned to him. "You really want me here?" "I do." She stepped closer. "And not just because I needed help?" Garrett looked at her, at the dirt on her dress and the strength in her eyes. "No, not just because of that." She touched his hand. "Then I will stay." He took her hand gently, and for the first time she did not flinch. Neither of them said the words. They did not have to. It was in the way she leaned into his side as they walked toward the cabin. In the way he looked at her like he had finally found what he had not known he was missing. They had both been left behind once. Now they were not alone anymore. The first days on Garrett's land passed quiet and full. Edda rose with the light, moved with a purpose she hadn't felt in months. She found a rhythm in the work hauling water from the creek, sweeping out the cabin's corners, boiling coffee over the stove Garrett had built from scrap iron and patience. She didn't ask what he expected of her, and he never gave her orders. They simply moved through the days together, each picking up what the other left off. On the third morning, she crouched by the garden patch behind the cabin, pulling at stubborn roots with dirt under her nails. Garrett returned from checking the fence line, a coil of wire slung over one shoulder and sweat darkening the back of his shirt. "You trying to grow carrots in hardpan?" he asked, setting the wire down. "Trying to grow anything," she said, standing slowly. "So far I've found rocks, thistles, and a broken spoon." He wiped his brow with the back of his hand. "There's better soil near the cottonwoods. Bit more shade, too. Why didn't you plant there?" "I never had reason to grow much. Just me out here." She studied the stretch of land between the trees and the creek. "We could turn it. Maybe this afternoon." He didn't answer right away. She looked up and found him watching her, not just the words she'd said, but the way she stood, like she belonged. "I'll hitch the mule," he said after a moment. That afternoon, while Garrett dug a new channel to guide water from the creek, Edda sorted through the seed bags he kept in a locked trunk, leftovers from years past. The paper packets faded but intact. She read each label like it was a promise. Beans, squash, turnip, corn. Her hands shook a little as she laid them out. He came in from the sun with dirt on his forearms and a quiet look in his eyes. "You ever do this before?" she asked, nodding to the seeds. "I watched my mother plant once, before she passed." "We were in Kansas then. Was it a good year?" "No," he said, setting down a tin pail. "Locusts took nearly everything." But she didn't stop trying. They planted until the sky turned amber. Edda's hands blistered, and Garrett's shirt clung to his back, but neither spoke of stopping. When the last hill of squash went in, they stood side by side, breath slow, watching the wind ripple through the grass. That night, after the dishes were washed and the shutters latched, Edda folded a worn shirt of his from the wash basin and hesitated. Garrett. He was oiling the latch on the storage chest. Do you ever feel like you're waiting for something and you don't know what it is until it's in front of you? He didn't speak right away. Then he set the rag aside and stood. Yeah, he said. I do. She met his eyes. I don't want to be someone's obligation. You're not. His voice didn't rise, didn't waver. You're someone I look for when I come back from the ridge. Someone I think about when I'm working. That ain't obligation. She stepped forward just once. I never thought I'd have a choice in anything. You do now. The air between them felt still and warm, like the hush before a summer storm. She reached out, her fingers brushing the edge of his palm. He turned his hand over slowly, letting her choose. She laced her fingers through his. Outside, a coyote yipped in the distance, and the fire snapped low in the hearth. Inside, neither moved away. The next morning brought the first hard rain in weeks. The roof held fine, but the trail to the road turned to muck. Garrett spent the early hours tending the horses while Edda boiled soaproot and scrubbed the floors. By midday, she found him on the porch, whittling a piece of pine into the shape of something not yet clear. You always working on something, she said, stepping out with 2 mugs of coffee. He glanced up. Keeps the hands honest. She sat beside him, careful not to bump the carving. What is it? She asked. Started as a spoon. He turned it in his fingers. Now it's looking more like a bird. She smiled as she sipped. You any good at birds? Not really. They listened to the rain fall on the roof, steady as a lullaby. Edda leaned her shoulder against the beam beside her. I don't miss the trail. Garrett didn't look at her. I hoped you wouldn't. She glanced sideways. You don't ask many questions. I figure folks tell what they want to share. I'm not used to that. He set the carving down and looked at her, slow and sure. You don't owe anyone your story. But if you ever want to tell it, I'll listen. Edda nodded, her throat tight. She hadn't come west looking for kindness. But now that she'd found it, she didn't want to let it slip away. That night, she pulled out a bundle wrapped in cloth from the bottom of her satchel. Inside was a small silver comb dulled with age. She set it on the table between them. My mother gave me this before I left Pennsylvania. Garrett looked down at it, then back at her. She told me it was for my wedding day. I carried it the whole way even after the river. He waited. I thought I'd never use it. But now. She lifted her gaze. I want to stay, Garrett. Not just for now. His chest rose and fell. You already are. She reached across the table and took his hand again, not tentative this time. He curled his fingers around hers as if they'd always fit that way. Out past the window, the rain eased, and a patch of starlight broke through the clouds. Neither of them looked away from each other. They didn't need to. The storm had passed, and the home they were building step by step was real. By late August, the corn had taken root in the soft, damp soil near the cottonwoods, and Edda had a sunburn across her forearms from weeding rows under the high Wyoming sky. The days stretched long and amber, and the space between her and Garrett grew smaller, not through words, but through the steady rhythm of shared labor and quiet glances held just a beat longer than necessary. One morning, she stood at the creek bank with her skirts knotted above her knees, scrubbing shirts against the smooth stone. Garrett stepped out of the barn, wiping his hands on his trousers. You know you don't have to do all that in the cold, he said, nodding at the water. I'd rather do it before the sun climbs too high, she said. Besides, it's clean work. The rest of the world isn't. He leaned against the fence post. You talk like someone who's seen a fair bit of it. I have. He didn't press her, but his eyes stayed on her a moment longer before he turned back toward the pasture. That afternoon, a rider came up the trail from the south, dust trailing behind like a signal flag. Garrett stepped onto the porch, one hand resting near his belt, not on the pistol but close enough. Edda stood behind the doorframe, eyes narrowed. The rider reined in at the edge of the yard and tipped his hat. He was older, with a stitched scar pulling at the corner of his mouth. Looking for a man goes by Ellsworth, he said. Garrett didn't move. You found him. The man squinted. Name's Cleary. I run a mail stop out near Red Lodge. Got a letter for you. Been holding it near 2 months. Didn't know where to send it till a trapper passed word you'd settled up here. Garrett walked down the steps and took the folded paper. Appreciate the ride. Cleary shrugged. Owe your brother a favor. Figured I'd pay it down. Garrett's jaw tensed, but he nodded once. Safe ride back. Cleary turned without another word. Dust swallowed him as he rode out. Edda stepped down beside Garrett. You never said you had a brother. He didn't answer right away. His thumb ran along the crease of the letter, still sealed. I don't not anymore. She touched his arm lightly. You don't have to tell me. He handed her the letter. Read it. I'd rather you know. She hesitated, then broke the seal and unfolded the page. Her eyes moved slowly, her lips tightening as she read. When she finished, she looked up. He's in Kansas City. Sick. Wants to see you. Garrett nodded. We haven't spoken in 12 years. He walked to the fence, resting both hands on the top rail. He left me with nothing but a mule and a debt I spent half my 20s digging out of. Why would he write now? He's dying, Garrett said. Men remember blood when they're close to losing it. Edda folded the letter and held it out. You want to go? I don't know. She didn't press. Instead, she turned toward the garden and began tying up the beanstalks that had started to lean under their own weight. That night, he sat at the edge of the porch, boots resting on the lower step, eyes fixed on the stars. You think you'll regret not going? She asked, her voice low. He shook his head. I already regret it. Just not sure if it matters anymore. She sat beside him, not touching, but close. Maybe it matters to you. He was quiet a long while. Then he said, He taught me how to make a fire in the rain, how to check a horse's hooves for stone. He taught me how to lie, too, how to take more than you leave behind. She rested her arms on her knees. I used to think family was something you had to stay loyal to no matter what. I don't anymore. Garrett turned his head toward her. What changed that? People who left me behind, she said. And one man who didn't. He didn't speak, but his hand found the edge of hers, fingers brushing the back of her knuckles. In the morning, he saddled the bay mare and packed a small satchel with jerky and oats. Edda didn't ask questions. She handed him a folded cloth with bread and dried apples. I don't know how long I'll be gone, he said. I know. He hesitated. This place. It's yours too. If I don't come back, you will, she said. But if something keeps you, I'll be here. He looked at her for a long moment, then leaned forward and kissed her forehead. Her eyes fluttered closed. I'll be back, he said. 3 weeks passed. Edda kept the garden alive, mended the roof after a windstorm, and traded eggs with the widow down the trail for coffee and soap. She slept with his shirt rolled at her back and watched the ridge every morning for a rider. On the 22nd morning, he came. Hat low, dust caked, shoulders drawn tight with travel. She met him halfway down the slope, skirts pulled up to her boots. He dismounted and stood before her, unsure. He was already gone when I got there, Garrett said. But he left a deed. A house outside Topeka. Said he wanted me to have it. Said I deserved something better. Edda's brow furrowed. You thinking of going? I was, he said. But I kept seeing the way you looked when you first saw the cottonwoods. I remembered the sound your hands make when you brush the garden rose at dusk. She stepped closer. I told the lawyer to sell it. I'm not leaving. Her breath caught, but she didn't speak. He reached into his coat and drew out a small box, worn at the edges. I found this in the attic, he said. It was my mother's. Figured she'd want it used for someone who knew what home meant. Inside the box, nestled in tattered lace, was a gold band, thin and plain. Edda's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. I can't promise a life without hard seasons, Garrett said. But I can promise I'll never walk away. She took the ring from the box and slid it onto her own finger. Then she looked up at him and smiled, slow and sure. You're already home, she said. And so am I. By early September, the cabin's roof no longer leaked, the garden had begun to yield its first beans, and the rhythm between them had settled into something unspoken but steady. Garrett rode out most mornings before dawn, checking the northern boundary where elk sometimes pushed through to graze. Edda took to drying herbs along the south wall, hung in careful bunches she tied with hand-spun twine. They spoke less now, but more deeply when they did. Not from distance, just the ease of knowing what silence meant in the space they shared. One evening she found him in the lean-to behind the barn, sharpening a draw knife with slow, even strokes. She crouched nearby, plucking burrs from the hem of her skirt. "You ever think about building more?" He looked up. "You mean another structure?" She nodded. "Something with a second room. I've been thinking about keeping a few hens come spring. Would need space for them to roost." Garrett wiped the blade with an oiled rag. "There's enough lumber left from the South Pine stand. Might take a week, maybe more, but it's doable. If you show me how, I can help." He set the blade down and leaned forward, forearms resting on his knees. "You sure you want to stay through the winter?" Edda tilted her head, thoughtful. "I've survived worse. And I'm not afraid of snow." He watched her a moment longer, then gave a slow nod. "All right, we'll start on the frame tomorrow." She stood, brushing her palms together. "One more thing," she said, her expression unreadable in the deepening dusk. "Would you mind if I started writing again?" Garrett blinked. "Writing? I used to keep a ledger. Not numbers, just thoughts. I stopped when I left Pennsylvania. But I've been thinking about keeping one again." He picked up the draw knife and set it aside, his voice low. "You don't need my say-so for that. I know. But I wanted you to know why I might be sitting quiet some days." He gave a single nod. "Seems right, putting things down. Helps make sense of what stays and what don't." Later, by lantern light, she stitched together pages from scrap parchment and bound them with thread, the spine rough but strong. She opened to the first blank page, stared at it, then set the journal aside for the night. The next day, they cleared a patch near the back fence where the sun hit long in the morning. Garrett measured the ground with a length of knotted rope while Edda held the ends taut. She didn't speak unless he asked for something: sandstone for the foundation, the hatchet from the wagon box, but when he looked up, her eyes were steady. By the fifth morning, the frame had risen just past waist height. Edda hammered shingles with a rhythm that matched the wind rustling through the tall grass. Garrett stepped back, rubbing his hands together. "You ever think about having others come through here?" she asked suddenly. He turned. "You mean visitors?" "No. I mean folks like me. Someone with nowhere to land. You think this place could hold more than two?" He looked out past the creek, where the cottonwoods had started to yellow. "It could, if we're careful. I was thinking about the widow near the ridge. She said her niece might need work come winter. Lost her people in the spring floods." Garrett considered that. "If she's willing to work, we could find a place." Edda leaned on the beam beside her. "Feels strange, doesn't it? Planning for others." He met her eyes. "Not strange, just new." That evening, they walked the edge of the pasture as the sun dropped low. Edda carried a willow basket filled with the last of the squash. Garrett held a small oil lamp, the flame flickering against the breeze. "Do you remember the first thing you said to me?" she asked. He chuckled softly. "Something about not leaving you behind. You said, 'Easy,' like you weren't sure if I'd bolt. You looked like you might." "I might have," she said. "But I didn't." They stopped walking, the golden light catching in her hair. Garrett tilted the lamp slightly, casting shadows along the trail. "I never asked if you still think about Oregon." "I don't," she said simply. "That road ended." He was quiet for a beat. "And this one's just beginning." They stood there as the last of the light faded, the scent of juniper rising from the ground. Garrett reached out, his hand resting lightly on her waist. She didn't move away. "Would it be all right," he said, voice low, "if I called you my wife?" Edda looked up at him, eyes calm but shining. "It would. Because it's true." They didn't kiss, not then. Just stood with their foreheads almost touching, the weight of the moment carried in stillness. The wind passed through the grass, and somewhere nearby, the creek murmured against its stones. Later that night, she opened her ledger and wrote a single line. "I was not lost. I was waiting. And he found me." The first frost came without warning, crusting the ground in white before dawn. Garrett woke to the sharp bite of cold air sneaking under the cabin's door frame. He added a log to the stove, careful not to wake Edda. She lay curled on her side beneath the quilt, one hand tucked beneath her cheek, her breath slow and even. Outside, the pasture was still. The mule stood motionless near the fence, steam rising from its nostrils. Garrett stepped out with a bucket and broke the ice on the water trough, his breath clouding in front of him. He heard the cabin door open behind him. Edda pulled her shawl tighter as she stepped onto the porch. "Ground's hard," she said. "We'll need to bring the squash inside before it spoils." "I'll fetch the cart," he said. "You stay warm." "I've been cold before," she replied. "I'll manage." They worked in silence, moving the last of the harvest into the root cellar Garrett had dug by hand 2 winters ago. Edda checked each gourd and ear of corn for soft spots, her fingers nimble. After, she stood at the cellar's edge, rubbing the chill from her arms. "I was thinking," she said, "about putting in a stove with a bread oven. We'd need to trade for the iron, but I could make it work." Garrett leaned against the doorframe. "We've got a few horses ready to sell. Could bring in enough for that and a few winter coats." "I'd like to bake again," she said, almost to herself. "Not just keep things warm. Really bake." He studied her a moment. "You miss it making something that lasts." "I do," she admitted. "Something that feeds people." He nodded once, then pushed off the frame and headed for the barn. She followed, trailing the scent of dried sage and wood smoke. Inside, he untacked the bay gelding and brushed its flank while she checked the feed. The stalls were dry, the hay stacked neat. Edda wandered toward the back corner, where the light fell soft through a high window. She paused. "There's something I want to ask." Garrett set the brush aside. "Go on. You said once this land could hold more than 2. She turned toward him. "Do you still think that?" His brow creased. "You thinking about bringing someone in?" "I was writing to the niece I told you about. Her name's Clara. She's 15, not a child, but not full-grown either. She's been living with her uncle near the coal camps. It's no place for her. You want her here? I want her safe. And she's family, what little I have left." He nodded slowly. "If she's willing to work and you're sure, then yes. She can help with the hens," Edda said. "And I can teach her what I know. I just didn't want to ask without knowing if you'd be all right with it." Garrett crossed the floor, his boots soft against the hay. "This is your home too. If you say she's family, then she is." Edda's eyes softened. "I'll send the letter tomorrow." That night, over a stew of smoked venison and onions, she told him about Clara's mother, how she died of fever 2 winters back. How Clara had taken to sleeping beside the stove with her boots on, ready to run if needed. "She's got a stubborn streak," Edda said fondly. "But she's sharp." "Sounds familiar." Edda smiled. "I just want her to know there's more than surviving." "You showed me that too," he said. In the weeks that followed, the wind turned sharper, driving leaves across the dirt yard like scattered parchment. Garrett finished the henhouse with Edda's help, and she patched the roof with oilcloth she bartered from a passing trader. Word came by way of a trapper that Clara was on her way, riding north with an elder couple from the widow's church. She arrived on a gray morning, wrapped in a heavy shawl and wearing scuffed boots too large for her. She barely looked up as she climbed down from the wagon. Edda met her halfway and took her hands. "You made it," she whispered. Clara nodded, her eyes darting to Garrett. He gave her a quiet nod. "You're welcome here." She didn't answer, but she didn't turn away either. Edda showed her the room they'd cleared, just wide enough for a bedroll and a small table. Clara ran her fingers along the windowsill without speaking. That night, she ate 2 full bowls of stew and fell asleep with her boots still on. The next days passed in the rhythm of winter preparation. Clara took to the hens quickly, and Garrett taught her how to split kindling without wasting the core. She didn't speak much, but she watched everything. One evening, as Edda stitched a hem by lamplight, Garrett returned from checking the snares. He stood in the doorway, quiet. "Snow's coming," he said. "By morning." Edda glanced up. "We've got enough stored?" "Plenty." She set the needle down. "Then let it come." That night, as the wind picked up and the fire snapped low, Garrett pulled a small box from the cupboard. He set it on the table beside her. "What's this?" He opened it to reveal a thin gold chain holding a locket no larger than a thumbprint. Inside, one side held a pressed violet, the other a scrap of parchment folded tight. Edda lifted it gently. "When did you make this?" "Found the chain in town last spring. Took a while to shape the clasp. I wasn't sure when to give it." She opened the locket and unfolded the paper. It was rough, the ink faded from the pressure of his hand. Just one word, always. Her eyes lifted to his. "You mean that?" "I do." She crossed the room and wrapped her arms around his waist, her cheek against his chest. "Then I'm yours. Always." Outside, the snow began to fall. Years later, the cabin stood strong beneath a new roof, the garden wide and full. Clara grew into a capable young woman who taught others what she'd learned. Edda's bread fed more than just the three of them, travelers, widows, and neighbors alike. Garrett built a second barn, and every spring they planted something new. They never left that land. They didn't need to. Love, once hard-won, had settled in quiet and deep, like roots in soil that no longer feared the frost.